I'm going to post something that I personally prefer to consider a fantasy story. It sounds much more reasonable than the possible alternatives and is easier for me in general because I don't like this story. The author is unknown to me. Here is a short introduction to how I discovered this text. I live in Moscow, and I recently needed to go to the other side of the city to pick up an order from an online store. Since I had nothing to do, I plugged my headphones in on my way back to the subway and started zigzagging around the unfamiliar neighborhood. I have this habit of walking aimlessly. On the way, I came across a decent-looking bar. When I left, it was dark and I was pretty drunk. I didn't know where I was, but I oriented myself and chose a direction towards the subway station. After walking a couple of kilometers, I realized that I had forgotten to use the bathroom in the bar. What do you guys do in these situations? Pee on everything, of course. After looking around and seeing no one, I got to the wall of the house I was walking past. There was a black plastic flash drive lying in the grass, which I might not have noticed at all. I don't know how long it had been there. Out of curiosity, I slipped it into my pocket with my lighter, then forgot about it for a couple weeks. I found it again the day before yesterday, just before doing the laundry. Despite the hardships I had endured, the flash drive was readable, though some of the photos were broken. On it, I found a text file called diary.txt and a few photos. For obvious reasons, finding the house is now impossible, but I will try next weekend. I'm sharing the text file with you, almost unchanged. I only corrected a few commas and typos that stood out. The diary. This isn't really a diary. I've never kept a diary. That would be inconsiderate. This text is an account of the events of the last few months. It will most likely turn out crumpled and scrappy. I'm writing it on the last of my nerves. You'll understand why, and I don't have much time. If you find it, read it and spread the word. I'm not hoping for help, but people should at least know. In fact, I don't even hope that anyone reads this. My internet is down and I can't leave my apartment. As soon as I'm done, I'm going to record the text and photos onto 3 flashcards and throw them out the window. It's almost like a note in a bottle. A last, desperate gesture. 1. I got into the faculty of philology, just as I had hoped. The philological faculty in the capital gave me the happiest opportunity to leave my father's home. The institute or the army were the only legitimate ways to leave home at all, and if I failed to get in, I would have gone to the military enlistment office myself. I'd asked them to send me away. I had almost no strength left to bear the atmosphere at home. In the army I would have had to be very tough, but believe me, I was ready to take a risk just to get out of my father's influence. My father is a fucking psychopath and a bastard domestic tyrant, and I would never have written that truth, not even in an anonymous letter, if I had any hope of getting back to normal. So I did. The exams were brutal, but when I saw the list of admitted applicants, I thought I was going to have a heart attack right in front of the admissions board. My name was on the list. My parents rented me a one-room apartment on the outskirts of town. On one side of the house were garages and a vague industrial zone, and on the other were a road, a vacant lot, and a forest of paneled houses with the occasional store or kindergarten. I didn't care. I would have been fine living in a dormitory or any shitty house, as long as I was left alone. My father rejected the idea of a dormitory at once. I was supposed to have it as a stranger from afar. No fraternizing or drinking for his son. Only diligent study. They got in touch with the curators and the dean's office right away, and my dad would find out about any mistakes I made right away too. I don't know the owner of this apartment. My father found it, agreed to the terms, and pays the rent by card. He also gives me a monthly allowance. He is ex-military. I am currently in this apartment, which is on the 8th floor of a 12-story long, Leviathan-like building. 2. It was the first time in my life that I had breathed that air. The smell of freedom mixed with exhaust fumes. I was free to go wherever I wanted and do whatever I pleased, not just what was expected of me. Weeks passed, but the euphoria never faded. For 17 years, I had spent time in one tiny room after another, in the company of my mother, a battered shadow of an empty woman, and my father. For the first time, the hope of liberation flickered within me. All I needed was financial independence. One evening, I stood on the balcony contemplating my plan to find a part-time job as a translator or copywriter. I smoked a cigarette, which tasted unusually good because I could smoke it openly. That's when I noticed something was wrong. The building was long and U-shaped on one side, forming a small courtyard, so I could see the windows of my building almost directly across from me. There were people standing motionless by every lit window, looking out into the courtyard. I understood absolutely nothing. I looked at my watch. It was 25 past midnight. There were no loud noises on the street that could have attracted everyone to the windows. The neighborhood was generally quiet. About a quarter of the windows were lit, which was still quite a few. In every lit window, there was a person, and in some places, there were several people. For some reason, it looked creepy, and I couldn't make out what everyone was staring at. Almost synchronously, everyone moved away from the windows and disappeared into the depths of their apartments. 3. I didn't think much of the event, but a couple of days later, the same thing happened again. This time, I was standing on the balcony with a cigarette and a can of cheap beer when figures appeared in each of the lit windows. I dropped my half-finished cigarette and burned my fingers. It was 12:34 a.m. and the people had been standing at the windows for about 50 seconds. The next evening, at midnight, I stood on the balcony looking from the window to the dial and back again. I held my phone, ready to photograph the anomaly. It happened at 15 minutes past 1. As in previous times, people came to their windows at the same time. I managed to take a few pictures, but they were mostly useless. My father bought me the phone for business purposes only, and its camera barely takes pictures in the dark. Still, I got some documentary proof of the incomprehensible shit going on in my house. What about my neighbors? What is this supposed to be? Some crazy ritual? While transferring the photos to my laptop, I remembered that the usual cardboard paneled noise outside the walls was almost silent when the figures appeared in the windows, though it was hard to judge from the balcony. The next night, I confirmed my theory. Apartment buildings are always noisy, except in the middle of the night. There's always a TV, a quarrel, stomping from upstairs, or someone on the right side of the building blasting monotonous piano scales. Although it was a little late for that. At some point after midnight, always between 12:10 and 1 a.m., everything except the TV and muffled Russian pop music seemed to cut off. Figures appeared in the windows. They stand, then they disappear, and the background noise of life in the big city resumes as if nothing had happened. This means that my neighbors on the same floor and upstairs take part in a schizoid performance every night, dropping what they're doing, going to the windows, and looking out into the yard. You can't see it from my balcony though. When I realized this, I became very uncomfortable in my new apartment. 4. I met my neighbor while taking out the trash. She's just an ordinary woman. She lives across the street with her husband and daughter, and they moved here not so long ago. We laughed at a joke and I promised her that I wouldn't organize concerts or wild parties. It was just small talk. So, is she the one who goes up every night to stare out the window like a statue? I had a plan. I started going out into the courtyard of the building at midnight. I wanted to figure out what was drawing all those strange people there. but there was nothing in the courtyard. During the day, children played on the playground, elderly men joked on a bench, and older men occasionally played ball in the hockey box. At night, the whole neighborhood around the house died out, which wasn't particularly strange. Everyone was just sitting in their houses with lit-up windows, and many of them had colored flashes of light from TV screens. The first floor of the house was occupied by stores, pharmacies, and hairdressers, but I could not see who was on the second floor. I went out into the courtyard several times until one day, while patrolling and peering through the windows, I finally saw a middle-aged woman and a little girl. The girl's head barely protruded above the edge of the second floor window frame. There were no curtains, and the opening was dark. They stood motionless close to the glass, staring straight at me, their lips moving in perfect synchrony. They were uttering some words. Their pained stares robbed me of my composure, and I fled. 5. I started having nightmares. I stopped going out on the balcony, instead pulling the curtains closed and fastening them with pins I found in a drawer in the closet. I literally snuck in and out of the building in the morning and evening, and I didn't feel safe until I took the subway a couple of stations away. I no longer trusted the ordinary sounds coming from behind the walls. A piano, a power drill, a neighbor coughing in the morning, the sound of elevators, pop music, and children stomping around, because everything seemed fake to me. I felt like someone was trying to trick me, and that I was missing something important. Being a rather withdrawn person, I hadn't made any close friends in Moscow yet, so I couldn't tell anyone what was happening and ask for help. What could I tell them? That my house was inhabited entirely by lunatics. That my neighbors were conspiring against me. They would obviously conclude that there's only one crazy person here, and it's me. But I didn't and don't feel crazy. I'm just a man who, by bad luck, stumbled upon some horror lurking beneath the mask of everyday life. With my allowance, I couldn't even afford a hostel. The dean's office explained that, since I had refused the hostel, I could no longer apply for it, because all the spots had been filled. I was going to post a story about all this on the internet, but I needed more information. Of course, I never forgot about my father. I didn't miss a single class, studied hard, and tried to spend less time in my apartment. That's why I only kept an eye on the tenants on weekends. They all turned out to be fake. They weren't living, they were faking it. This became obvious to me soon enough. I tried to observe the residents of the neighboring houses to check this, but it quickly became boring. People behaved normally and didn't notice anything. This could not be said about the creatures inhabiting the hive disguised as a house. They would leave the house. They would go about their important business with purpose. They would get on all sorts of public transportation and drive in circles while staring out the window. They'd take the ring road, make pointless transfers, and then come back. They'd go to stores and leave without buying anything. Going to the center, walking somewhere, then just turning around and taking the same road home. I saw them pretending to have animated conversations on turned-off cell phones twice. As far as I could tell, none of them were working, and they didn't have visitors from outside. Children were chasing each other around the playground and making sand cakes in the sandbox. They molded and broke the same sand cakes time after time, running along the same trajectory with a certain periodicity. Nobody hit anybody. It wasn't child's play, it was imitation. The house was a closed system, and its inhabitants carried out activities that seemed meaningless to an outside observer, but created the impression of an ordinary life. But I was no longer an outsider. I was watching closely. I began to suspect that my life depended on it, and I knew I had to figure out what was going on. In nature, there are small bugs called lomacusa. They lay their eggs in healthy ant hills. The beetles secrete a euphoric substance that causes the ants to lose their ability to act and think. The ants lose interest in the beetle and in everything else. They stop working and looking for food and wander around in circles. Lomocusa eggs are indistinguishable from ant eggs. When the larvae emerge, the hypnotized ants continue to feed them as their own. At first glance, the affected ante looks normal, but upon closer inspection, it becomes obvious how wrong things have gone. Lamikusa. That's what I was thinking as I sat on the bench before walking into the entryway and closing the door behind me into a house where my laptop can't see any Wi-Fi networks other than mine, where, as it turns out, there are many apartments for rent at an attractive price, just below market rate. 6. In my nightmares, I wander through empty entryways and strange apartment corridors at home. Nothing happens, but it's as if a slender chorus is whispering words to me that I don't understand. Gradually, my anxiety turns into panic as I look for a way out, but I can't find it. Snapping out of it, I call my father. The verdict is that I must either stop dorking, study, and live here, or he will take my documents from the university and take me home. He hung up on me. I just can't go back, but I can't stay here either. Every night, the whole house is watching me. I've had a couple of tantrums. I seem to have exhausted myself emotionally. I go to class and take careful notes that I can't make sense of later. Unpretentious food has lost its flavor. Although, what flavor is there in store-bought dumplings? My plans to find a job have fallen by the wayside. I have a heavy head in the morning. In the evenings, I lie idly on the bed and listen to the sounds coming from behind the walls. Someone is watching a movie. Someone else is yelling at a child. Everything is a lie. A few more weeks went by like that. I was walking back from the library late tonight, after midnight. As I passed my neighbor's door, I pulled the knob. It's hard to say why. My apathy is to blame. The door opened into an apartment with a similar layout to mine. In the hallway, I saw a barely furnished lit room. In the center of it, my neighbors sat with their backs to each other. The woman, her husband, and a younger girl I hadn't met yet, daughter. No one reacted to my appearance. The husband stared at the wall in front of him with a completely blank face. The mother and daughter were passionately arguing about whether the daughter could go to a sleepover. Their voices were lively and real. Turn around and you could picture a cute family scene and smile. But their faces, both aunts and daughters, also expressed absolutely nothing. They weren't even looking at each other. They were staring straight ahead. The argument ended abruptly. Suddenly, all three of them looked at me. 7. I finish my report, and it's getting light outside the window. I slam the iron door shut, lock the lock, and lean back against it. When I catch my breath, I quietly slide open the lid of the peephole. Sure enough, all three of them are standing motionless and silent just outside the door. I call my father again on my last dime and shout something obscene, calling me a goddamn junkie and saying that he knew it. He hangs up. He's coming, but it takes about 8 hours by car to get to Moscow from our town. The internet is down, first of the month being the first of the month, just in the nick of time. Several times I interrupt myself and go look through the peephole. Now there's a silent crowd outside the door. The whole entryway must have gathered. The house is very quiet. In all the windows I can see from here, figures are frozen and they don't move away from the windows anymore. I was wrong. I should have gotten out of here right away. Father's coming. Yes, I'm just afraid his respectful, perfectly normal son will open the door, apologize for his behavior, maybe even offer to introduce him to the neighbors. They're such nice people.